Hello, dear reader, and welcome to the Mex Story Porch channel, where we bring you tales that touch the heart and remind us that life's most beautiful transformations often begin with the smallest acts of courage. Today's story is about a woman who walked into a fortress and found a home. If you enjoy this journey, please like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment telling us what you think. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's begin. She stood in the marble foyer of the Rick estate, utterly unmoved by the soaring ceilings and the crystal chandelier that probably cost more than her childhood home. Stacey Wright had arrived 15 minutes early, not to impress, but because punctuality was simply efficient, and she'd spent those minutes cataloging the household's operational weaknesses. The staff moved with the nervous precision of soldiers expecting inspection, and the silence was so profound she could hear her own heartbeat. When Charles Rick finally descended the grand staircase, she didn't gasp or straighten unnecessarily. She simply extended her hand with the kind of firm grip that suggested she'd shaken hands with CEOs before and found them distinctly ordinary. He didn't take her hand immediately. Instead, he studied her with the cold assessment of someone accustomed to finding fault. He was handsome in that severe, sharp-edged way that came from too many late nights and too much control. His suit was impeccable, his posture militaristic, and his eyes held the kind of exhaustion that no amount of sleep could cure. "You're the seventh applicant this month," he said, finally shaking her hand with a grip that tested her resolve. She matched it without flinching. "The others lasted an average of 11 days. What makes you think you'll be different?" She met his gaze without wavering. "I don't think I'll be different, Mr. Rick. I know I will be. The question is whether you're prepared to employ someone who won't tremble when you raise your voice or quit when you move a deadline up by 3 hours." His eyebrow lifted, the first crack in his armor. "Confident," he observed. "Realistic," she corrected. "I've read the employment history for this position. It reads like a disaster novel. But I've also reviewed your household requirements, and frankly, they're not impossible. They're just exhausting for people who lack organizational discipline." He gestured toward his study, and she followed, noting the precisely aligned books, the dust-free surfaces, and the faint scent of expensive coffee that suggested he'd already consumed at least 3 cups that morning. The interview was unlike any she'd experienced. He fired questions like bullets, each one designed to destabilize, to find the weak point in her composure. He asked about her ability to manage a staff of 12. She outlined a staffing matrix she'd designed on the train ride over. He questioned her experience with high-net-worth individuals. She noted that wealth was simply a modifier, not a personality trait, and she'd managed difficult personalities in far less comfortable environments. When he asked why she needed this job, she didn't perform the expected dance of flattery. "I need the salary," she said plainly. "I have student loans that would make a hedge fund manager weep, and a mother whose medical bills require consistent, substantial income. This position pays well above market rate, presumably because you're notoriously difficult to work for. I can handle difficult. What I can't handle is financial instability." He blinked, just once, but it was enough to suggest she'd surprised him. "You're aware that staff members have quit mid-shift?" he asked. "I'm aware that your previous household manager left after you criticized the angle of the morning newspaper on your breakfast tray," she replied. "With respect, sir, that says more about your expectations than her competence. If you hire me, I'll meet your standards. But I'll also expect you to communicate those standards clearly rather than expecting telepathy." The corner of his mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close enough to suggest she'd passed some invisible test. "You start Monday," he said. "6 a.m. sharp. The employee manual is 400 pages. I expect you to have memorized the essentials by your first day." She stood, smoothing her sensible skirt. I'll have it memorized by Sunday evening, Mr. Rick. I assume you'll want coffee at 6:47 a.m., black, 92 degrees Celsius, delivered to your study while you review the morning briefing? He stared at her. How did you? Your previous household manager's notes were included in the employment packet, she said. She was meticulous, even in her resignation letter. I believe her exact words were, if one more person asks me to achieve thermodynamic impossibilities, I will commit arson. This time, he almost smiled. Almost. And Stacey Wright walked out of that marble foyer knowing she'd just accepted the most challenging job of her life and that she was going to excel at it. Section 2. The First Week War. She arrived Monday at 5:30 a.m., not because she was nervous, but because preparation prevented panic. The staff was already assembled in the kitchen, a collection of tired faces and wary eyes that suggested they'd witnessed too many managers crash and burn. Good morning, she said, setting down her leather portfolio. I'm Stacey Wright, your new household manager. I've reviewed all operational protocols, and I have 3 observations. First, the current scheduling system is inefficient and creates unnecessary overlap during low demand periods. Second, the supply chain management needs restructuring. You're overordering perishables and underordering cleaning supplies. Third, Mr. Rick's demand for silence during thinking hours is reasonable, but the current enforcement method is creating staff anxiety that reduces overall efficiency. The chef, a woman named Margaret who'd worked for the Ricks for 3 years, raised an eyebrow. And you plan to tell him this? I plan to implement solutions that achieve his desired outcomes without creating operational bottlenecks, Stacey replied. He wants efficiency and perfection. I'll deliver both, but I'll do it by working with you, not against you. Margaret's expression shifted from skepticism to cautious hope. By 6:47 a.m., Stacey was standing outside Charles Rick's study with his coffee, black, precisely 92 degrees, in his preferred mug with the handle positioned at 45 degrees. She knocked once, entered without waiting for permission, and set the coffee on his desk. He looked up from his tablet, clearly prepared to find fault. His gaze moved from the coffee to her face. Punctual, he said. Efficient, she corrected. Your morning briefing is on the side table, organized by priority. Your daughter's schedule has been optimized to reduce transition time between activities by 12 minutes, which will allow her an additional quarter hour of unstructured time before bed. And the West Wing heating system has a faulty sensor. I've scheduled a repair for this afternoon during your conference call, so you won't be disturbed by the maintenance crew. He stared at her. It's your first day. Yes, sir. Is the coffee temperature acceptable? He took a sip, his expression unreadable. It's perfect. The first week was a brutal test of endurance. Charles Rick's demands were exactly as absurd as advertised. He expected reports delivered before he requested them, meals served at temperatures that required scientific precision, and a level of anticipation that bordered on clairvoyance. But Stacey had faced worse. She'd managed a logistics company during a supply chain crisis and coordinated a nonprofit's emergency response during a natural disaster. A wealthy man with control issues was simply another puzzle to solve. When he complained that his morning tea was half a degree too cool, she replied, "My apologies, sir. I'll have the thermometer recalibrated. Clearly the ambient air is failing to cooperate with your preferred beverage." He'd looked up sharply, searching for insolence, but her expression remained professionally neutral. When he demanded a comprehensive household audit by the following morning, a task that would normally require 3 days, she'd responded, "Consider it done. I'll just have to invent a time turner, but otherwise, it's a piece of cake." His eyes had narrowed. Are you being sarcastic, Miss Wright? No, sir. I'm being efficient. The audit will be on your desk by 7 a.m. It was, and it was flawless. By the end of the second week, the household staff had begun to relax. Stacy's systems were working, reducing their stress while maintaining Charles's impossible standards. Margaret had actually smiled during the morning briefing, but it was during the third week that Stacy encountered Emily. The girl was 7, with her father's dark hair and sharp eyes, but with a gentleness that suggested she'd inherited her mother's heart. She appeared in the kitchen one afternoon, moving with the practiced silence of someone accustomed to being overlooked. Stacy looked up from the inventory spreadsheet. "Hello, you must be Emily." The girl nodded, surprised to be addressed directly. "I'm Stacy. I'm the new household manager, which means I make sure everything runs smoothly, so your father can focus on his work and you can focus on being 7. Emily tilted her head, studying Stacy with the same assessing gaze her father used. "The last manager cried in the pantry." "I'm aware," Stacy said, "but I don't cry in pantries. I reorganize them. Would you like to help me? I'm trying to figure out the optimal placement for the cereal boxes, and I suspect someone your height would have valuable insights." For the first time, Emily smiled. Over the following weeks, their afternoon sessions became routine. Emily would appear, quiet and observant, and Stacy would engage her in whatever task was at hand: organizing the library, testing new recipes with Margaret, or creating elaborate organizational charts that Emily decorated with surprisingly artistic flourishes. Stacy never treated her like a fragile ornament or a disruption. She treated her like a person with opinions, preferences, and value. And slowly, the lonely little girl who'd learned to be invisible began to bloom like a flower finally given sunlight and water. Section 3. Breaking Through Ice. Charles noticed he'd find them in the library, Emily laughing as Stacy demonstrated the Dewey Decimal System using dramatic voices for each category. Or in the garden, where Stacy taught Emily to identify plants while simultaneously directing the groundskeeping staff. He'd stand in doorways, watching, his expression unreadable. One evening, he called Stacy into his study. "You've been spending time with Emily," he said without preamble. "Yes, sir," Stacy replied. "She's a delightful child, highly intelligent, creatively inclined, and remarkably patient with my terrible jokes. Her schedule doesn't include unstructured time with staff." Stacy met his gaze. "With respect, sir, her schedule includes 17 structured activities per week, 3 tutors, and precisely 45 minutes of approved creative time. That's actually more structured than my college thesis. She's 7. She needs unstructured time, and she needs human connection that isn't performance-based." His jaw tightened. "I don't recall asking for your parenting advice." "You didn't, sir, but you hired me to manage your household efficiently, and a household includes the people in it. Emily is part of this household, and her well-being affects operational efficiency. A lonely, understimulated child will eventually create disruptions that affect your work schedule. A happy, engaged child will not." They stared at each other, the silence stretching taut. Finally, he said, "You're dangerously close to overstepping, Miss Wright." "Yes, sir," she agreed. "Would you like me to stop spending time with your daughter?" He looked away, his gaze finding the silver-framed photograph on his desk, a beautiful woman with Emily's gentle eyes and a smile that suggested she'd known how to puncture Charles's armor. "No," he said quietly. "Continue." And just like that, something shifted between them, subtle as a change in the wind, but profound in its implications. The crack in his armor widened slowly, like ice breaking under persistent pressure. He began asking her opinion on matters that had nothing to do with household management, a difficult board member, a strategic decision about a potential acquisition. Her responses were always pragmatic, occasionally irreverent, and surprisingly insightful. Late one night, 3 months into her employment, she found him in his study at 2 a.m., staring at financial projections with the hollow-eyed exhaustion of someone running from ghosts. "Sir, you have a 7 a.m. meeting," she said from the doorway. "You need sleep." "I need solutions," he replied without looking up. She entered, setting down a cup of chamomile tea, not his usual coffee, but something to help him sleep. "You need perspective. You've been staring at those numbers for 4 hours. They haven't changed, and they won't change by force of will." "They need to change," he said, his voice rough. "If this acquisition fails, then you'll pivot, adjust, and continue." She interrupted. "You're not infallible, Mr. Rick, despite your best efforts to convince everyone otherwise. But you are resilient, intelligent, and surrounded by people who can help shoulder the burden if you'd occasionally let them." He finally looked at her, and she saw the exhaustion that went bone deep. "I can't fail," he said quietly. "Not again." She understood immediately. This wasn't about business. This was about the photograph on his desk, the empty space beside him, the weight of grief manifesting as control. "You didn't fail her," Stacey said gently. "Cancer failed her, medicine failed her, but you didn't, and driving yourself into the ground won't bring her back. It'll just rob Emily of both parents." His expression shattered, just for a moment, raw pain bleeding through before he rebuilt his defenses. "You should go, Miss Wright." "I should," she agreed. "But I'm going to sit here until you drink that tea and close those reports, because someone needs to manage you, and apparently I'm the only one unimpressed enough by your glowering to actually do it." Despite everything, he laughed. It was a broken, surprised sound, but it was genuine. He drank the tea, he closed the reports, and when she stood to leave, he said, "Thank you." She paused at the door. "You're welcome, Charles." It was the first time she'd used his first name. He didn't correct her. And in that quiet moment, with moonlight streaming through the study windows and the world outside still sleeping, they both understood that something between them had fundamentally changed, that the professional boundaries they'd maintained so carefully were beginning to blur into something neither of them had planned for, but both of them desperately needed. Section 4. The Gala Transformation. The annual Investor Gala was a spectacle of wealth and performance, a high-stakes theater where Charles was expected to play the role of visionary leader and charming host. He despised it with the intensity of someone who valued efficiency over performance. 2 weeks before the event, he appeared in Stacey's office, a small, meticulously organized space she'd claimed in the East Wing. "I need you to accompany me to the gala," he said without preamble. She looked up from her tablet. "I assume this is a professional request, not a social one?" "I need someone who can handle difficult investors, prevent me from saying something I'll regret, and navigate social situations with the same efficiency you apply to everything else." "So you need a handler," she said dryly. "I need someone I trust," he corrected. And there was something in his voice that suggested the admission cost him. She studied him for a long moment. "I'll require a clothing allowance. If I'm representing your household at a high-profile event, I need to meet certain standards." "Done." "And a bonus, hazard pay if you will, for preventing you from insulting the hedge fund manager who called your Q3 projections optimistically delusional." His mouth twitched. "You read the financial press coverage?" "I read everything, Mr. Rick. It's my job to anticipate your needs, which includes knowing which investors might require diplomatic intervention. The bonus is yours, Anything else? Yes, you'll need to smile at least 3 times during the evening. Genuine smiles, not the terrifying expression you use when you're trying to appear friendly, but actually want people to leave. He stared at her. You're negotiating my facial expressions? Someone has to, she replied. Your pleasant expression makes children cry. This time, he definitely almost smiled. 3 smiles, genuine. Anything else? Try to enjoy yourself, sir, just once, for experimental purposes. The night of the gala, Stacey emerged from the car in a midnight blue gown that transformed her from an efficient household manager to someone who belonged in this world of crystal and champagne. She'd swept her hair into an elegant twist, and her confidence was evident in every measured step. Charles, waiting at the entrance, found himself momentarily unable to form words. "Will I do, Mr. Rick?" she asked, amusement dancing in her eyes. "You'll do," he managed, offering his arm. "Try not to charm everyone too efficiently. I need some investors left for next year." The evening unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance. Stacey moved through the crowd with the same purposeful grace she applied to household management. She charmed the difficult hedge fund manager by discussing market trends with unexpected sophistication. She deflected an inappropriate comment from a board member with a smile so sharp it could cut glass. And when an investor's wife began monopolizing Charles's time with increasingly vapid conversation, Stacey rescued him with the practiced efficiency of a special forces extraction. "Forgive me," she said smoothly, "but Mr. Rick is needed for a rather urgent discussion about the upcoming acquisition. You understand, I'm sure." The woman's expression suggested she didn't understand at all, but Stacey had already guided Charles away. "There is no urgent discussion," he murmured as they moved toward the terrace. "I know," she replied, "but you looked like you were considering diving through the nearest window, and that would create unnecessary paperwork." They stepped onto the terrace where the night air was cool and mercifully quiet. The city glittered below them, a constellation of lights that suggested the world was larger than ballrooms and business. "You're remarkable at this," Charles said, studying her profile. "The social performance. It's not so different from household management," she replied. "Anticipate needs, prevent disasters, maintain order. The only difference is the costume." "It's more than a costume," he said quietly. "You belong here." She turned to face him, her expression thoughtful. "I don't belong anywhere in particular, Mr. Rick. I adapt. It's my most valuable skill." "Charles," he said. "I'm sorry?" "Call me Charles. You've been managing my life for 6 months. I think we're past formalities." She smiled, and it was the genuine smile she reserved for Emily, for Margaret, for the moments when her professional mask slipped. "All right, Charles, but only when we're not in front of the staff, propriety and all." "Stacey," he said, her name unfamiliar on his tongue, intimate in a way that made him acutely aware of how close she was standing. "I want you to know that you've become essential to the household, to Emily, to—" He stopped, the words catching somewhere between his carefully controlled exterior and the chaos of feeling beneath. She waited, patient as always, giving him space to find his way. "To me," he finally said, "you've become essential to me." The admission hung between them, fragile and honest. "I took this job for the salary," she said softly. "I stayed because of Emily. But somewhere along the way, I started staying for you too." When he kissed her, it was tentative, as though he'd forgotten how to be gentle. But she met him halfway, her hand finding his face with the same competent certainty she applied to everything else. Section 5. Forever Scheduled. When they broke apart, she said, "That counts as smile number 4, by the way. You've exceeded your contractual obligation. He laughed, truly laughed, and pulled her close again. The following months were a study in incremental transformation. Charles didn't become warm overnight, and Stacey didn't stop being pragmatic. But the fortress he'd built around his heart developed more cracks, more windows, more doors she could walk through. He learned to delegate, to trust, to occasionally smile without being reminded. He took Emily to the park without a structured activity plan. He asked Stacey's opinion not because she was staff, but because he valued her mind. And Stacey, who'd approached this job as a financial necessity, found herself building something she'd never expected: a home. Emily was the first to notice the shift. She appeared in Stacey's office one afternoon, her expression serious. "Are you going to marry my dad?" she asked, with the blunt honesty of a child who'd learned to observe carefully. Stacey set down her pen. "That's quite a question." "He smiles now," Emily said. "Real smiles, not the scary ones. And he asks what I think about things. And he doesn't work until midnight anymore." "That's good, isn't it?" "It's very good," Emily agreed. "I think it's because of you." Stacey felt her carefully maintained composure waver. "Your father is learning to be happy again. That's his choice, his achievement. I'm just here." Emily climbed into the chair across from Stacey's desk, her legs swinging. "My mom used to say that the best people are the ones who make you want to be better. Dad wants to be better now, because of you." Out of the mouths of precocious children, Stacey thought, came devastating truths. She reached across the desk and squeezed Emily's hand, unable to find words adequate for the moment. Sometimes love arrived not in grand declarations, but in quiet afternoon conversations with a 7-year-old who'd been watching more carefully than anyone realized. The grand gesture came on an ordinary Tuesday. Stacey was in the study, reorganizing Charles's filing system because even after all this time, his method of organization offended her sensibilities. He appeared in the doorway, watching her with that expression that had evolved from critical assessment to something that made her heart stutter. "I have a proposition," he said. "If it involves reorganizing your office again, the answer is no. I've already created the optimal system 3 times, and you keep reverting to chaos." "Not about filing," he said, moving closer. "About us." She set down the folders, giving him her full attention. "I've spent 3 years running from grief," he said, "building walls, maintaining control, convinced that if I could just manage everything perfectly, I wouldn't have to feel the loss. But you?" He shook his head, almost wonderingly. "You walked into this fortress and dismantled it brick by brick, with competence, sarcasm, and an unwavering refusal to be impressed by my defenses." "I was impressed by your espresso machine," she offered. "That's a very fine piece of equipment." His laugh was warm, unguarded. "Stacey, I'm trying to tell you that I love you." The words landed with the weight of something both inevitable and miraculous. "That's highly inefficient," she said, her voice unsteady. "Love is unpredictable, emotionally complicated, and extremely difficult to schedule." "I know. It will disrupt your carefully managed routine." "I'm counting on it. And I'm still going to reorganize your files, no matter what you say." "I wouldn't expect anything less." She closed the distance between them, her practical heels bringing her eye level with his chin. "I love you too, even though you're impossible, demanding, and you make that face when the coffee isn't exactly 92 degrees. "What face?" "That face," she said, and kissed him. When they told Emily, she responded with the satisfied expression of someone who'd seen this coming for months. "Does this mean Stacey is staying forever?" she asked. Charles looked at Stacey, his expression open in a way that would have been impossible a year ago. I certainly hope so. Forever is a long time, Stacey said thoughtfully. But I suppose I could manage it. I'll need to create a comprehensive schedule. Emily giggled. Charles pulled them both close, and in that moment, in the study of a fortress that was finally becoming a home, Stacey Wright, pragmatic, unflappable, and unimpressed by wealth, found herself exactly where she belonged. The household, she noted with satisfaction, had never run more smoothly. 2 years later, on a spring afternoon filled with cherry blossoms and possibility, Stacey Wright became Stacey Rick in a ceremony that was equal parts elegant and efficient. Emily served as maid of honor, her speech noting that she'd always known they'd end up together because Stacey is the only person who can make Dad laugh when he's being grumpy. Margaret catered, of course. The coffee was served at exactly 92 degrees. And Charles smiled, genuinely, warmly, frequently, throughout the entire day. And so our story comes to a close, dear friends. Sometimes the walls we build to protect ourselves become the very prisons that keep us from living. Stacey didn't conquer Charles's fortress with force. She dismantled it with patience, competence, and the quiet insistence that he deserved to be happy again. She reminded us that love isn't always about grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes it's about showing up every day, being unimpressed by someone's armor and seeing the person underneath. If you're building walls today, remember, the right person won't storm them. They'll simply make you want to open the door. Thank you for joining us on the Story Porch. Please like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment about what this story meant to you. Until next time, keep your heart open and your coffee precisely heated. Morale: the strongest walls fall not to force, but to the gentle persistence of someone who sees past them and loves us enough to wait while we find the courage to let them in.